Hello everyone, this is Wendy. Welcome to my channel. This pattern and video is for those of you who prefer to work on two straight needles rather than circular needles or double pointed needles and would like to make a pair of socks. This is a custom sized sock, meaning that you can use any weight of yarn with a appropriate needle from about, a number 1 to a number 4 yarn, so a fine sock weight yarn all the way up to a worsted weight yarn. They will all work and they will all fit. The important thing is to take a few basic measurements and to know your gauge. So the first thing that you'll need to do is to make a gauge swatch. Pin it out, stretch it slightly, and then you can measure how many stitches you get per inch. In my pattern, which is linked below, you'll find a chart, and that's where we're going to take the measurements. To begin with, I'm going to note my yarn weight, which is a DK weight yarn. I'm going to be using a 3.25 millimeter needle. And I'm just writing it down so that if I happen to put my work down, I will remember what I was using. The next step is to collect the measurements and do the calculations to customize the fit. So you'll need to measure the length of your foot. I find the most accurate way to do this is to put the end of the tape measure against a baseboard, against the wall, or even a piece of paper, and then step on it and either mark the total length of your foot on the piece of paper or note it on the tape measure. In my case, I have pretty big feet, so my measurement is 10 inches for my length of my foot. So that's our L on our chart. The circumference is the widest part of the foot behind the toe. So I'll just show you on the sock here, but you'll measure on the actual foot. And if you are making socks for somebody who is far away, just ask them to measure the length and the width of the circumference of their foot. It's important to step on the tape measure when you do this because your foot spreads out quite a bit when you step on it. So in my case, the widest part of my foot, just behind the toe, is 9 inches. Okay, so that gives us the measurements for the foot. Next, we need the measurements for the gauge. So again, taking a ruler or a measuring tape, we're going to measure over 4 inches. So starting at the number 4, I'm going to count back to the 0 and see how many stitches I've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2. So 22 stitches over 4 inches. So that gives me, I'll get my calculator here just to make sure I'm doing it right, 5.5 stitches per inch. All right, that's my gauge that I get with this yarn and my needles and my tension. That's the important thing to know. The base number of stitches in the pattern is the gauge times the circumference. So I got 5.5 for my gauge times 9 inches for circumference is 49.5. Now it's important that you work with a multiple of 4 for this pattern. So we're going to round down to the nearest multiple of 4, which is 48. So that's my base number of stitches. Now at some point we're going to increase for the instep so that this part of the foot is a little bit wider. And I will need to know what my total number of stitches is going to be at that widest point. To get that, I'm going to multiply my base number of stitches by 1.3. So my base number is 48 times 1.3 and that gives me 62.4. And again, I'm going to round down to the nearest multiple of 4. And that's the number I'll round down to. So my increase for the instep will be 60. And I'm going to start the increases halfway up the foot. So halfway up the length of the foot. So in my case, that's 5 inches. Okay, so your gauge, round it down to the nearest multiple of 4, multiply that by 1.3. If you have a very high instep, you could go as much as 1.4. And start the increases halfway up the foot. Those are the numbers we need to calculate the custom fit. Now I'll show you how to make the sock. Start by casting on 20 stitches. You can adjust that number depending on the size of sock you're making. So you could start with 12 if you're doing a child's sock, or up to 24 if you're doing an adult male sock and you want a wider toe box. But I find that 20 is a good average place to start. And I know it's hard to believe that you can make socks for children to large adults using this same formula, but it really does work. You can always make adjustments after your first pair if you find that you want it a little narrower or wider for yourself. But give it a try. Make a pair and see what happens. Okay, so 20 stitches. I'm going to purl across those 20, but I am going to stop after 10 because I want to mark the center point. It's important to know where the center point is. So after 10 stitches, I'm going to add a little marker, and I'm going to transfer that back and forth with each row so that I keep track of where the center of the sock is. I am making the right hand sock here. If you're working round and round, you just make 2 socks exactly the same. But when you're making a sock that has a seam in it, like this one, it's important to have the seams opposite. So this is a left hand sock, and the seam runs up the inside of the foot, and this is going to be my right foot sock, so that the seam is opposite. Row 2 and the other even numbered rows are on the outside of the sock. The odd number rows will be the purl side or the inside. And on the even numbered rows, you're going to increase. And I'm going to keep it a very simple increase. It just goes like this. Knit the first stitch. We're going to increase in the second stitch. And to do that, just knit into it. Then with your left hand needle, pick up the left leg of that stitch you just knit and knit into the front of it again. That makes an increase that doesn't leave any gaps. The stitch marker marks the point where you switch from the top of the foot to the bottom of the foot. So we're going to increase in the second and the second last stitch on the top, and the second last stitch on the bottom. So I am in the second last stitch on the top of the foot. I'm going to knit that one, again pick up the left leg, knit it again, knit the last stitch, transfer the marker over, knit the first stitch, increase in the second stitch. It's the same increase every time. Keeps it very simple. Increase in the second last stitch. knit the last stitch. On the purl side, just purl across. Every odd numbered row or every purl side row, you're just going to purl with no increases. Now I'm going to repeat rows 2 and 3, increasing in the second and second last stitch on the top and on the bottom, and purling back on the other side. So each time I do a right side row, I will increase 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches. I'm going to repeat those 2 rows, 2 and 3, until I have the number of stitches needed for my base number of the foot, which I already determined is 48. So when I've increased from my initial 20 to 48 and ending on a purl side row, I will be ready to move on to the next section of the foot, which will just be straight knitting. The toe increases are done. I'm up to the 48 stitches that I determined was my base number of stitches. So this part just up to here, where it stops increasing, that's what I've finished so far. The next step is to continue in stockinette stitch until I reach that halfway point up the foot, which in my case is 5 out of the 10 inches of the length of the foot. So I'm going to work until I get to the 5-inch mark, just working knit stitch on this side and purl stitch on the back side, continuing even on those 48 stitches. Or if you're using a different number of stitches, just continue even on whatever number you determined as your base number of stitches. And I will come back when I'm ready to start increasing for the instep, which is halfway up the foot here. It starts to get a little bit wider. I'll see you soon. So I've reached the 5-inch mark, which is halfway up my foot. Now it should be noted that that's not going to be halfway on the sock length. The sock is more like a good 10 to 15% shorter than the foot length because it needs to have some give and some stretch. If you make it exactly the same length as your foot, you're going to find that it fits too loose. You may have noticed I'm working back and forth on a circular needle. That's just a personal preference. You can work on 2 straight needles, that's just fine. I'm using the circular needle as if it were 2 straight needles. That's just how I like to hold them. Okay, so now we're going to do the instep increases, which just happen on the top of the foot. Okay, so in this case, this is going to be the top half of the foot, this first half, and this is going to be the bottom half of the foot. So my increases are just going to happen on this half before the marker. And they'll be just the same way as the toe increases. Knit 1, increase in the second one by picking up that left leg of the stitch that I just did with my left hand needle and knitting into the front of it. Knit across to the center marker, or 2 stitches before the center marker, actually. Okay, there's the second last stitch before the marker, increase in that one. Knit 1, transfer the marker, and then just knit the rest of the row. On the next row, which is a purl side row, and every purl side row, just purl across, maintaining the same number of stitches. On the next row, the knit side row, increase again as before. So in the second stitch and the second one before the marker. Transfer the marker and knit the rest of the row without any increases. Then purl back. So far I've done 4 rows since I started the instep increases, increasing 2 stitches on the first and third and purling back on the second and fourth. For the 5th and 6th rows, I'm just going to work even. So knit across, purl across with no increases. Then I will repeat those 6 rows until I get to the 60 stitches I'm looking for, or whatever number that you designated as your increase for instep number. If you have the pattern in front of you, all these instructions are clearly written out. The purpose of the video is just to explain it visually. So I'm going to continue until I have all the increases done on the top half of the foot and a total of 60 stitches across. My instep increases are finished. You can see now that the top of the foot is a lot wider than the bottom. And I'm going to show you the simplest heel turning strategy that I've ever used. This is something that I came up with myself. If you've seen it somewhere before, let me know. But it's just a really easy way to turn a heel. It doesn't leave any gaps, and it doesn't require a lot of counting or any kind of complicated wrap and turn. And here's how it's done. I'm going to knit across the first half of the stitches for the top of the foot. When I reach the stitch marker, I'm going to transfer it over from the left needle to the right needle. It's important to maintain your stitch marker. Then knit all the way to the last stitch. We're going to start the heel in the last stitch on this row. I'm going to zoom in close so you can see what I'm doing here. So leaving this last stitch on the needle, I'm going to look for the stitch that's just below it. So that's this pink stitch here. It twists a little bit on the end, so it's harder to see. But I'm going to put my needle into the stitch below it, trying not to split it, or there we go, pick it up first. Okay, so do you see that? I've picked up the one below. I'm going to knit that one so that it will look like there are 2 stitches coming out of the same stitch. So this pink one here. Then I'm going to take the one that I just made and put it on the left-hand needle. So that stitch has been paired. There's 2 of them. Leaving those 2 on there, turn around and purl back to the last stitch before the marker. In this last stitch before the marker, I'm going to purl into the stitch below. So instead of purling into this one, I'm going to drop down and purl into the stitch below it. Again, making a paired stitch. Putting that stitch that I just made onto the left needle. So now the original stitch is on that needle, plus the one I just made, both of them coming out of this white stitch below. Leaving the rest of the foot the way that it is, turn around and go back. We're just going to work back and forth on these heel stitches. So right now I have a paired stitch on each end. Knit across until you get to the stitch before the paired one. So these last two stitches are the paired stitch that I did last time. Now I'm going to stitch into the one below this stitch that's before the paired ones, so the second last stitch. So stitching into the stitch below, knit that one, and put it on the left hand needle. Now I've got two paired stitches on that side. Turn and go back, and purl across to the last stitch before the paired one. So this second last stitch here. And do the same thing. Purl into the stitch below, transfer that stitch over to the left hand needle, and then you'll have two pairs on each end. And just continue in that manner, pairing the stitch that's just before the ones that are already paired. So in this case, I'll do this third one here. It's the last unpaired stitch. Then go back and do the last unpaired stitch on the purl side. Continue doing that back and forth until you have 10 stitches left in between that are unpaired. Or if you started with a different number for the toe, the number that you have left in between that's unpaired should be half the number that you started your toe with. So I started my toe with 20 stitches, and I need to leave 10 stitches unpaired after I go back and forth pairing the stitches. Okay, so one more time. This one's paired, this one's paired, this third last one, I'm going to stitch into the stitch below it, make a second stitch in that one, and transfer it to the left. The last paired stitch you should be doing on the purl side. Then turn so you have your right side facing. So you can see here I have these 10 stitches for the middle of my heel, right there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pairs on that side and 7 pairs on this side. Now to combine these stitches back together, all you do is knit across those 10 remaining unpaired stitches, or however many you have. When you get to the paired stitches, just knit them together as if they were one stitch. Do that to the end of the row. Turn and go back, and on the purl side, same deal, just purl across until you get to the paired stitches, and then purl each pair together back into one stitch. And that's it. That's how you turn the heel. It couldn't be any easier. No fuss, just a nice round heel without any gaps or any fancy strategies. Just paired stitches and then put them back together. Then transfer the stitch marker and finish purling that row. Looking at the sock, you can see I have the turned heel on this side, this bump here, and the wider instep area here. Now we need to start decreasing above the heel, making the instep smaller again toward the ankle. We're going to do that basically in the opposite way that we increased. It's a 6-row decrease, starting with a plain knit and purl row, working all the way across the sock and keeping that stitch marker at the center point. If you're following along on the written pattern, we're on step 6, and I've already done row 1 and 2, which was a plain knit and a plain purl row. Row 3 is a decrease row. We're going to work a slip slip knit near the beginning and a knit 2 together near the end, and it looks like this. So knit the first stitch, slip slip knit the second and third one. I like to slip the first one knitwise, so from the front slip it to the right hand needle, and the second one purlwise, so pick that one up. From the back like so, both of them are now on the right hand needle. Put your left hand needle through both of those stitches so that it's sitting in front of your right hand needle. Wrap to knit and pull those 2 stitches through and off, and that makes a nice left leaning decrease. Knit across to the last 3 stitches before the marker. With 3 stitches left before the center marker, knit 2 together. So put 2 stitches, pick them up with your needle like that, wrap to knit, and take them off at the same time. That makes a nice right leaning decrease. Knit the rest of the way across, and then purl back. So for the next row, which is the 5th out of the 6-row decrease sequence, we're going to do another decrease row. So knit 1, slip knitwise, slip purlwise, put the needle through the front, oops, and slip slip knit those together. Knit across to the last 3. With 3 left before the marker, knit 2 together and knit the last one. Knit across the rest of the row and purl back. So that's your 6-row sequence for decreasing. Knit a row, purl a row, decrease a row, purl a row, decrease a row, purl a row. Repeat those 6 until you get back to your base number of stitches. So I'm going to go from the 60 that I had back down to 48. Now that I'm back down to my base number of stitches, my decreases are all done. All that's left to do is the leg portion of the sock. And that's going to be done in ribbing. And you can just make it as long as you want to. Continue till you run out of yarn if you like. That's the nice thing about toe-up socks. You can take your yarn, divide it in half, start at the toe, and then go until you run out of yarn for the cuff part. That way you make the most use of your yarn and just leaving a little bit left to sew it up together at the end. So I'm going to do a knit 2, purl 2 ribbing until I have the same length of cuff that I have on this other sock, and then I'll show you how I do the bind off to keep it a little bit stretchier. For a knit 2, purl 2 ribbing, it's just the way it sounds. Knit 2 stitches, purl 2 stitches, knit 2 stitches, purl 2 stitches. And as long as you have the multiple of 4 that I mentioned earlier, you should end up with 2 purl stitches. And on the next row, you purl the purls and knit the knits so that your ribbing stitches are the same on both sides. I hope that you're enjoying this project. If this is your first time making a sock, congratulations, we are almost done. To make a bind off that's a little bit stretchier and isn't going to be too tight around your leg, we're going to add in a few extra stitches as we go, and it looks like this. Knit the first stitch, knit the second stitch, pass the first one over top of the second one, just like a regular bind off. Now I'm going to add in a yarn over. So wrap the yarn from back around to the front and pass the stitch that's on your right hand needle over the yarn over. That adds almost like a chain in between the rib to give you some extra stretch. Bring the yarn to the front for the purl stitch and purl. Pass the right hand over the left hand stitch, purl the second one, pass the stitch over, and then put the yarn across in front. Now because it's a purl, we're not going to wrap it all the way around, we're just going to lay it across the front, pick up the right hand stitch and put it over. So every 2 stitches we're going to introduce a yarn over. Knit, pass it over, knit, pass it over, yarn over, pass it over, purl, pass it over, purl, pass it over, yarn on top of the needle, and pass that one over. Continue like that all the way across the cuff. There's the cuff all finished. You'll find that adding in those yarn overs gives it just that little more give, that it's not going to grab too tight around your leg. Then simply take a yarn needle and sew up the seam and across the toe. And there you have it, a nice cozy pair of basic socks. You can adjust as you like by adding lace or cable work or anything that you want to add to this basic pattern. If you find that it's a little too wide or too narrow, you can go up or down by multiples of 4, but it's a great, simple starting sock. I hope that you've enjoyed this pattern, and if after watching this video, you would consider it a good investment to spend a few dollars on the written version, you can find the link to that below. Thanks so much for joining me, and have a super day.